NASCAR fans, this is one of those stretches of the season where the story keeps shifting from one race to the next, and just when you think you understand where a team stands, everything gets rewritten again. What happened over the last 2 race weekends is a perfect example of that. On the surface it looks like a simple string of results, a suspension here, a strong finish there, a dominant winner on Sunday. But when you dig into the details, you find a much bigger narrative about how fragile momentum can be in this sport, and how one mistake on pit road can echo across multiple weekends. So let's slow down and walk through everything that happened, piece by piece, because there's a lot more going on here than a quick highlight reel could ever capture. It all traces back to the Cup Series race held on the Qualcomm circuit at Naval Base Coronado, an event that already stood out on the schedule for being run on a military base road course, something NASCAR doesn't do very often. Early in that race, on just the 18th lap, the number 23 Toyota driven by Bubba Wallace suffered a right front wheel that came loose and detached from the car. For anyone who doesn't follow the sport closely, this is about as serious as pit road infractions get. A wheel coming off at speed isn't just a mechanical failure, it's a genuine safety hazard, not only for the driver whose car loses the wheel, but for every other competitor and crew member working along pit road at that moment. NASCAR treats these incidents with zero tolerance, and the penalties reflect that. Because of the detached wheel, NASCAR handed down suspensions to 2 members of Wallace's pit crew, the rear tire changer and the jackman, sidelining both of them for the following 2 Cup Series events. That meant their suspensions would carry all the way through the race weekend at Chicagoland Speedway coming up on July 5th. It's worth pointing out that Wallace himself served an in-race penalty on the day the wheel came off, but NASCAR's rulebook doesn't stop there. Automatic crew suspensions are built into the system specifically because loose wheel incidents are considered too dangerous to be handled with anything less than a multi-race consequence for the crew members directly responsible. Here's where the story gets more interesting though. Despite dealing with that penalty in the middle of the race, Bubba Wallace didn't fold. He fought back through the field and ended up crossing the finish line in 2nd place, which turned out to be his best result of the entire season up to that point. For a team that had been searching for a signature performance, this felt like exactly the kind of race that could shift the entire trajectory of their year. A runner-up finish, especially one earned after overcoming adversity mid-race, is the type of result that builds confidence heading into the next event. Everyone around the team, and plenty of fans watching at home, expected that momentum to carry forward. Instead, the very next challenge arrived almost immediately. With the 2 suspended crew members unavailable, the 23 team had no choice but to bring in substitutes for their pit crew heading into the race weekend at Sonoma Raceway, one of the most demanding road courses on the entire circuit. This is where casual fans sometimes underestimate just how much of a disadvantage this creates. A pit crew isn't a group of interchangeable athletes who can simply swap in and perform identically. These are highly trained units that spend countless hours together, week after week, building timing, chemistry, and instinctive communication. Every motion during a pit stop, from the jack to the tire changes to the fueling, depends on repetition and trust built over months, sometimes years. Suddenly losing 2 core members of that unit right before a demanding road course weekend is not a minor inconvenience. It's a significant handicap. Bubba Wallace was honest about how difficult the situation felt heading into Sonoma. Speaking before qualifying, he acknowledged there simply wasn't enough time to build real chemistry with the replacement crew members who had stepped in. He didn't dispute the fairness of the rule itself. He understood exactly why NASCAR enforces those suspensions, but he also didn't pretend the circumstances were anything other than tough. In his own words, he said it was unfortunate for the group, but that the substitute crew members had been putting in the practice time they could. Then, more bluntly, he simply admitted, quote, "It sucks." And honestly, that reaction probably resonates with most competitors in the garage. Nobody on that pit crew intentionally caused the wheel to come loose. These are penalties tied directly to NASCAR's safety enforcement, not accusations of cheating, but the consequences hit just as hard regardless of intent. One split-second mechanical failure ended up reshaping the outlook of multiple race weekends for an entire organization. If that wasn't enough adversity already, Saturday added another layer of difficulty. During qualifying at Sonoma, Wallace was involved in a crash that damaged his car and left the team scrambling to prepare for race day under even more pressure. So heading into Sunday, the 23 team wasn't simply dealing with unfamiliar hands on pit road, they were also repairing qualifying damage on the car itself. Combine an inexperienced pit crew with a compromised race car, and you get about as difficult a starting position as a team can face heading into a demanding road course event. For a season that has already had its share of ups and downs for Wallace, this was an especially steep mountain to climb. While the 23 team dealt with all of that adversity, another storyline completely took over the spotlight at Sonoma, and that storyline belongs to Shane van Gisbergen. Once again, the New Zealand driver reminded the entire garage why he has become the man to beat whenever the series turns onto a road course. Starting from 6th on the grid, van Gisbergen worked his way forward methodically before taking control of the race entirely. He ended up leading 74 of the race's 110 laps, an enormous share of the event, and held off a hard-charging Chase Briscoe by just over a third of a second to claim the win. That margin might sound close on paper, but make no mistake, this was a performance built on total command of the racetrack rather than a last-lap survival act. What makes this victory even more remarkable is the context surrounding it. Just one day earlier, van Gisbergen had already won the Xfinity Series race at the very same track, and he did it starting from the pole position. Winning both National Series events at the same venue during the same weekend is an incredibly rare accomplishment, and it reinforces just how completely road courses have become his specialty. At this point in the season, whenever NASCAR heads to a road course, van Gisbergen isn't just considered a contender, he's the driver every other team is specifically trying to figure out how to beat. That win also carried real weight in the championship standings. With his second Cup Series victory of the season now locked in, van Gisbergen jumped up to 14th place in the points, climbing 3 spots in a single weekend. As the season pushes deeper into its second half and the playoff picture starts to take shape, positioning like this matters enormously. Every spot gained now is one less obstacle to deal with later when the margins for making the playoffs become razor thin. Meanwhile, Bubba Wallace and the 23 team leave Sonoma facing a completely different conversation than the one they were hoping for. Instead of building on the confidence from that runner-up finish just 1 week earlier, they now have to regroup after a qualifying crash, continue adjusting to life without 2 of their most experienced pit crew members, and try to rediscover their rhythm before the schedule reaches several critical events later this summer. That's really why this entire situation carries more weight than a single disappointing weekend. In a season where every point matters for playoff qualification, one mechanical failure on pit road has now rippled outward, affecting crew suspensions, pit stop execution, qualifying performance, and race results across back-to-back weekends. As frustrating as that stretch has been to watch, it's hard not to acknowledge the flip side of this story. Just 7 days before Sonoma, Wallace proved he still has the speed to run with the very best cars in the Cup Series field. That runner-up finish wasn't a fluke, it was a genuine signal that this team is closer to contention than some might assume. The real question now becomes whether they can absorb these setbacks quickly enough to keep their playoff push alive, or whether this stretch of adversity ends up costing them valuable ground at exactly the wrong point in the calendar. On the other side of the garage, it's becoming harder and harder to ignore just how dangerous Shane van Gisbergen has become every time a road course shows up on the schedule. He isn't simply winning these events anymore, he's dominating them from start to finish, forcing every other team and driver to completely rethink their approach whenever the circuit turns right instead of just left. That kind of consistency on road courses is rare in modern NASCAR, and it's turning van Gisbergen into one of the most talked about storylines of the entire season. As the 2026 season rolls forward, these 2 storylines are only going to grow in importance. Bubba Wallace and the 23 team are fighting to keep their playoff hopes alive while navigating the fallout from a single pit road mistake, and Shane van Gisbergen has firmly established himself as one of the hottest and most dangerous drivers in the entire Cup Series field. Between the safety-driven crew suspensions, the pressure of adapting to new personnel mid-season, and a road course champion who seems nearly unstoppable right now, the next several race weekends are shaping up to be some of the most consequential of the year. There's also a broader question worth sitting with here. Were these suspensions simply a fair and necessary consequence of NASCAR enforcing its safety standards, or do penalties like this end up punishing teams more severely than the actual mistake deserves, especially when a driver like Wallace still manages to deliver a strong result despite the setback. And after another commanding weekend-sweeping performance at Sonoma, it's becoming increasingly difficult to argue against the idea that Shane van Gisbergen has become the outright favorite every single time this series turns onto a road course. One thing is clear as the calendar moves forward: NASCAR rarely lets any storyline stay simple for very long. A wheel coming loose on lap 18 at Naval Base Coronado ended up shaping crew assignments, pit stop execution, qualifying outcomes, and championship positioning across multiple race weekends. Meanwhile, a driver from New Zealand keeps rewriting what dominance on a road course actually looks like. With the playoff picture tightening week by week, every decision, every pit stop, and every point earned or lost from here forward is going to matter more than ever. The next chapter of this season is still being written, and if these last 2 weekends are any indication, there's plenty more drama still to come. That there's also a broader question worth sitting with here. Were these suspensions simply a fair and necessary consequence of NASCAR enforcing its safety standards, or do penalties like this end up punishing teams more severely than the actual mistake deserves, especially when a driver like Wallace still manages to deliver a strong result despite the setback? And after another commanding weekend-sweeping performance at Sonoma, it's becoming increasingly difficult to argue against the idea that Shane van Gisbergen has become the outright favorite every single time this series turns onto a road course. One thing is clear as the calendar moves forward: NASCAR rarely lets any storyline stay simple for very long. A wheel coming loose on lap 18 at Naval Base Coronado ended up shaping crew assignments, pit stop execution, qualifying outcomes, and championship positioning across multiple race weekends. Meanwhile, a driver from New Zealand keeps rewriting what dominance on a road course actually looks like. With the playoff picture tightening week by week, every decision, every pit stop, and every point earned or lost from here forward is going to matter more than ever. The next chapter of this season is still being written, and if these last 2 weekends are any indication, there's plenty more drama still to come.